Uh, this is, I guess, number 11 already in our little series of things around Greensburg, Pennsylvania. This time we're going to see something that was on the edge of Greensburg back in about 1880. And I'm going to talk about something that a fellow named Will Johnston, that would be William Alexander Johnston, did as a little kid. He later in life wrote several books, and one of them was the story of his growing up around Greensburg, Pennsylvania. I've always, for a long time, suspected that he was a descendant of Alexander Johnston, the fellow who was a very prominent politician in early Greensburg and started the iron furnace out at Kingston. But I've never really established that, so if anybody knows that, I would appreciate some input. Will Johnston later moved to out to Ohio. He became an engineer, a civil engineer, at the time when the railroads were being built, and that's what he did for most of his life. And what we're going to hear about today is something that happened when he was, maybe around 9 or 10, and coming into town down Main Street. And well, something happened. You'll hear about that. I'm going to read a little bit from his book. This is his book, My Own Main Street. He did it in 1921, shortly after Sinclair Lewis had published his book, Main Street. And Will Johnston thought it would be a good idea to give his own version of what he considered his hometown, Greensburg. This is from chapter 25. The 4:30 Cokes, slow-moving, grunting trains were puffing up the steep grade, and we listened for Lou Henry's whistle. We always knew it, and the whole town knew the why of it. Lou had a flirtation with the prettiest girl in paradise, and he was accustomed to begin whistling way down by the county home, his blasts growing in volume as he neared Huff Station. At Paradise, he always took his hand from the whistle cord to wave to the belle of those parts, Miss Angie, who was always at the window with a radiant smile for him. We watched the trains pull past the little engine house, the old gallows tree where Corrigan was hanged. Actually, Corrigan was never hanged. He killed himself with poison in prison, but it was commonly thought, I guess, that he was hanged. Smith's slaughterhouse, the vilest smelling place in the county, and Mrs. Monahan's little Irish shanty, as we called it. And that's Will Johnston, the guy that wrote this stuff. For miles around, the country knew Mrs. Monahan, her hare-lipped son Larry, and that's Larry. Will Johnston actually illustrated some of this stuff. I must always remember that shanty, for here it was that for the first and only time in my life I saw a violent death. I was on my way to my grandfather's south of town and had just reached the top of Bears Hill when I heard a great crash and saw that just at the engine house, this is the engine house here, this is Bears Hill coming down here, named for the Bears Mill. Heard a great crash. Just at the engine house, the engine and several southbound cars had struck a cut of cars and caboose standing on the siding. I raced over as fast as my little legs would carry me and reached the wreck just as a trainman carried the engineer over into Mrs. Monahan's shanty. This is the wreck. This is the fellows carrying the engineer, and that's Mrs. Monahan's little Irish shanty. I raced over and carried the engineer. Monahan's shanty on the floor. I saw him writhe in agony and point dramatically to one of the little knot of his companions and scream hoarsely, "You did it! You did it! Your carelessness has killed me." And he died before the man prostrate on his knees beside him could be forgiven. And that's Will Johnston's childhood memory of sometime in the 1870s or 1880s down here at the little Irish shanty. This view is looking south. You have here the tracks of the Southwest Branch. You have Euclid Avenue. You have Main Street, and we have the other features here. And we move on. Now, what we're recalling is that that was not the only wreck on that stretch of railroad. Right at the place of the little Irish shanty was another wreck in 1919. Two freight trains hit head on, and the impact was hard enough to whack one of them 90 degrees, so that it came within a yard of the little shanty, Mrs. Monahan's little Irish shanty. And the person living there they were Ruffners living there. And Mrs. Ruffner was sent to the hospital. Even though the engine didn't go that far, it scared her to the point that she was hospitalized. This is the cleanup from that wreck in 1919. And we see a few other scenes from that day up along the tracks.